In the heart of a city that never sleeps, where the rhythm of life plays to the sound of car horns and hurried footsteps, there stood a tiny 24-hour diner tucked between a crumbling laundromat and a pawn shop that hadn't changed its signage since the 80s. It was a place forgotten by the world, but not by its patrons, truck drivers, night shift nurses, and lost souls seeking comfort in a cup of coffee and the kindness of strangers. Among them was Maya Bennett. 28 years old. Slender, quiet, with tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and a soul that had weathered more storms than most twice her age. Maya worked the graveyard shift at Lola's Diner, 6 nights a week, 7 hours a night, barely making enough to cover rent and her mother's mounting hospital bills. She walked to work every night to save on bus fare and brought a homemade sandwich for her one break, peanut butter and banana, cheap and filling. She wasn't the type to complain. She didn't have the luxury. Maya believed life wasn't supposed to be fair, it just had to be endured with dignity. So, she served burnt coffee with a smile, endured rude customers with grace, and always left a few dollars in the tip jar for the dishwashers, even when her own pockets were nearly empty. On one particularly cold and rainy Tuesday night, just past 2 a.m., a man in a tattered coat stumbled into the diner. He was soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably. His hair was matted, his shoes falling apart, and his eyes were sunken with hunger and despair. He collapsed into a corner booth without saying a word. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others outright staring. But Maya? She simply picked up a fresh pot of coffee and walked over. "On the house," she said, pouring it into a chipped mug. "Let me get you something warm." The man looked up at her, lips trembling. "I can't pay you." "You don't have to," Maya whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder before disappearing into the kitchen. She had no money herself. The cash register wasn't hers to open. But in her backpack, wrapped in a napkin, was her only meal for the night. The sandwich. Her sandwich. She took it out, cut it in half, warmed it slightly on the griddle, and brought it out on a plate with a side of fries she claimed had been mistakenly made for another table. The man devoured it in silence, eyes brimming with tears. Maya refilled his coffee 3 times and never once made him feel like a burden. What she didn't know, what no one in the diner knew, was that a man sitting at the farthest booth, hidden beneath a baseball cap and glasses, had been watching the entire exchange. That man was Julian Reed, media mogul, real estate tycoon, and the enigmatic billionaire CEO of Reed Corp International. Known for his ruthless boardroom tactics and vanishing acts from the public eye, Julian was rarely seen outside of Manhattan's elite circles. But tonight, Julian had walked into Lola's not for food, but for clarity. Earlier that evening, he'd sat in the back of his private car outside a board meeting, listening to a voicemail from his estranged sister. She was terminally ill. And her final message wasn't about reconciliation. It was about regret. She told him, with all the bluntness of the dying, that he had become cold, hollow, a man with everything and nothing. Her final words haunted him. "You used to care, Julian. I don't know what happened to you." So, he asked his driver to keep going. Past the upscale restaurants. Past his penthouse. Past his name in lights. He wanted to see something real. Something human. And now, watching Maya, Julian saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time, genuine kindness. After the homeless man had left. His belly full, his spirit slightly lifted, Julian waited until the diner cleared. Then he removed his cap and approached the counter. "You're not from around here," Maya said with a chuckle, noticing his leather boots and expensive watch. He smiled. "Not exactly." She poured him coffee without asking. "Rough night?" "You could say that." They talked for nearly an hour. Maya never asked about his job, his money, or what he was doing at a rundown diner in the middle of the night. She just talked to him like a human being. About her mother. About life. About hope. When Julian finally stood to leave, he handed her a small business card with nothing but a name and number on it. "If you ever need anything, call me." She tucked it into her apron, not thinking much of it. Rich men sometimes flirted. They sometimes promised things they never meant. The next morning, when her shift ended, Maya returned home to find an ambulance outside her building. Her mother had collapsed. The hospital wouldn't proceed with surgery until payments were cleared. Maya remembered the card. With trembling fingers, she called the number. A receptionist answered. "Reed Corps International, how may I direct your call?" Maya hesitated. I think I have the wrong number." Just before she hung up, another voice came through the line. Calm. Familiar. Maya. It was Julian. That same afternoon, the hospital received a donation large enough to not only cover her mother's surgery, but to fully fund the hospital's indigent patient care program for the next 2 years. But Julian didn't stop there. Within days, Maya was invited to an office in Midtown Manhattan. Waiting there were lawyers, a personal advisor, and a representative from the Julian Reed Foundation for Social Equity. She was offered a full scholarship to complete her nursing degree, a salary while she studied, and a job waiting for her at one of the foundation's partner clinics. Julian never made a public statement. He refused interviews. But behind closed doors, he did something else, something radical. He began using his wealth to create a network of emergency relief centers for the homeless. The pilot location? Lola's Diner. Rebuilt, refurbished, and reopened as a community kitchen and resource hub, with Maya named as its director. The story hit headlines within weeks, not because Julian publicized it, but because people talked. Customers who had seen Maya's simple act of kindness that night came forward. The homeless man, now off the streets and working at the diner, spoke to local news. And soon, the city took notice. A billionaire had been changed, not by power or pressure, but by a waitress with a peanut butter sandwich. Closing voiceover, fade to black with soft piano. They say kindness costs nothing. But sometimes, it's worth everything. Maya didn't change the world. She didn't have millions, or power, or privilege. But in the quiet corner of a forgotten diner, she gave what little she had to someone who had even less. And someone was watching. In a world that often feels indifferent, it's easy to believe our small gestures don't matter. But maybe, just maybe, those small gestures are the very threads that hold the fabric of humanity together. This is the thread of time. The new Lola's Community Kitchen had opened quietly, with little fanfare. No celebrity endorsements. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just fresh paint, new stoves, and a line of people stretching around the block. People who'd heard that here, just here, there was warmth, food, and no judgment. Inside, Maya walked with new purpose. She still wore an apron, but now she wasn't just taking orders, she was giving them. Coordinating food drives. Organizing volunteer rosters. Helping set up mental health screenings and job training sessions. But even with everything changing around her, Maya remained the same at her core. Kind, grounded, and deeply aware of the life she came from. She never let anyone forget that every single person who walked in deserved dignity, because she'd once needed the very same thing. Julian visited only once a week. Quietly. No entourage. He sat in the back booth. The same one he'd used that rainy night. Sometimes he helped serve. Other times, he just watched. He watched the teenage boy who used to sleep behind the diner now tutor kids at the back table. He watched the ex-convict who once begged for change now run the dishwasher like a general in command. And he watched Maya, this woman who had unknowingly rebuilt his soul, transform a space with little more than compassion and structure. But change is never without resistance. Scene, Reed Corps boardroom. Back in his high-rise, Julian faced pressure. Shareholders questioned the foundation's expanding expenditures. Executives murmured about his erratic behavior. Why was the CEO of one of the world's most powerful conglomerates spending time in soup kitchens? Why had he begun redirecting millions into low-return, high-impact community efforts? One evening, during a particularly hostile board meeting, Julian stood up mid-sentence and walked to the window. Manhattan glittered beneath him, cold and brilliant. And then he turned and said something no one expected. "Let me tell you a story," he began. "About a woman who gave her last meal to a stranger. And didn't ask for a thing in return. That's the kind of leader I trust. That's the kind of person I follow." Silence. "And if this company has a problem with that kind of character, then maybe this company isn't the one I should be leading anymore." He didn't wait for a reply. The next day, Julian stepped down from day-to-day operations at Reed Corp and appointed a younger, reform-minded COO to replace him. He moved full-time to his foundation. And when asked by a reporter why he'd give up so much power, his answer was simple. "Because I finally understand what real power looks like. It's feeding someone who can't pay you back." Scene, Maya at the hospital. Meanwhile, Maya's mother, now recovering steadily, watched her daughter rise from waitress to local hero. She often said Maya's greatest strength wasn't her kindness, it was her quiet belief that people deserved second chances, even when the world didn't believe they did. One night, as Maya helped close the diner, the same man from months ago, the homeless man she fed, walked in. Clean-shaven. In work boots. With a small bouquet of flowers. "I got the job," he beamed. "Maintenance crew. City Hall." He placed the flowers on the counter. "For you. For saving my life." Maya smiled. "You saved your own. I just made you a sandwich." Montage, the ripple effect. Across the city, Maya's story spread, not because she told it, but because others did. In a high school classroom, a social studies teacher shared it with students learning about economic inequality. In a podcast studio, a young host recounted it during a segment on everyday heroes. In shelters, in cafes, in quiet living rooms, people repeated it. And in every retelling, the message grew clearer. Small acts of kindness can change the world, because they change people. Scene, full circle, 1 year later. 1 year to the day after that rainy night, a soft drizzle once again painted the sidewalks silver. The community kitchen was busier than ever. And in the back booth, Maya and Julian sat once more. But this time, they weren't strangers. They were partners. Julian handed her a thick envelope. She opened it slowly, eyes widening. A deed. The building was now hers. Not a lease. Not a loan. A gift. Full ownership. Julian smiled. "I figured the heart of this place should belong to the one who gave it life." Maya looked around. At the volunteers, the customers, the steam from the kitchen, the laughter, the music, and she finally let herself feel something she hadn't in years. Peace. Final voiceover, closing reflection. In a world where everyone is rushing to get ahead, to make noise, to be seen, one woman quietly gave what little she had, and in doing so, changed everything. Maya Bennett didn't start a revolution. She started something harder. She reminded people that humanity isn't found in headlines or handshakes at the top. It's found in the warmth of a sandwich. In a hot cup of coffee. In the unspoken message, "You matter. I see you." And that message reached someone powerful enough to amplify it. One woman's kindness. One billionaire's reckoning. One night that altered the thread of time. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories, don't start with fireworks. They start with a peanut butter sandwich. Outro, soft music builds. This was a story about a waitress, a billionaire, and a forgotten diner on a rainy night. But more than that. This was a story about you. Because someone, somewhere, is watching how you treat people. And when the moment comes to choose between comfort and compassion, may you choose compassion. This is Thread of Time.